Accessing peace. Existing without violence, with the ability to calmly resolve conflict. Downloading love. An overwhelming, deep, positive affection towards others. Activating liberty. Living your life as you see fit without infringing on the lives of others.
Welcome to Peace, Love, Liberty Radio, online at fppradio.com. I am your host, Darryl W. Perry, the Liberty Penguin, the Wombat, the uncut cocaine of libertarianism. And, you know, I've just been having one of those days for, like, the last 2 days. It happens occasionally, right? Well, you know, I stumbled across a couple of articles. One of them I stumbled across several days ago. The other I came across today. And, well, I want to try jumping into both of them. They are somewhat connected, even though the article that I came across today is actually about 4 years old. Well, not quite. About 3.5. Came out September 2014. The other was a study that came out just recently from Cigna Health Insurance, and they wound up using a study done by UCLA, and, well, let's just jump into it. Jumping into the newer story first, and the link for both stories, just in case I don't wind up getting to the older story from Time Magazine, specifically the health portion of Time Magazine. Both links will be in the show notes, where you can read them at your leisure, and there are a couple of tests that you can take if you wish to do so. So, headline from NPR: Americans are a lonely lot, and young people bear the heaviest burden. Loneliness, they say, is not just a fleeting feeling, leaving us sad for hours or sometimes a few days. Research in recent years suggests that for many people, loneliness is more like a chronic ache affecting their daily lives and sense of well-being. Now, a nationwide survey by health insurer Cigna underscores that. It finds that loneliness is widespread in America, with nearly 50% of respondents reporting that they feel alone or left out always or sometimes. Now, pause here to say that sometimes and always are vastly different things. It's kind of like when, you know, some of the things of share this hashtag if you have ever been attacked by bears or worn pants. Those are vastly different things. So sometimes could be once every 5 years. Some people might say that's rarely. Probably, but again, rarely and sometimes. It's in the, eye of the beholder, right? Where I think most people would wind up thinking that given the choices between almost never, rarely, sometimes, and always, that sometimes would be closer to the always. But again, depending on how you wind up interpreting words, sometimes could mean almost never. But continuing on. Again, the fact that 50% of respondents said sometimes or always to feeling lonely or left out, that should tell you a lot right there. Using one of the best-known tools for measuring loneliness, the UCLA Loneliness Scale, Cigna surveyed 20,000 adults using an online survey, adults from across the country. The UCLA tool uses a series of statements and a formula to calculate a loneliness score based on responses. Now, let me pull up the test here, and I will read off some of these questions. I will not take the test live on the show here, and actually, let me see if I can find it again, because I remember having taken it, but the link in the article takes you to some place where you have to pay to take the test, and I am not paying to take the test. So I found the test, and it's a PDF. I will post the link to the PDF in the show notes. So it's one of these things, like you don't actually, select little buttons and then it tallies for you. You're going to have to do some math here. So the options for responses are often feel this way, sometimes feel this way, rarely, or never. 20 questions. I'm happy doing so many things alone. Or rather, I'm unhappy doing so many things alone. And then you answer often, sometimes, rarely, or never. Another question. I lack companionship. There's no one I can turn to. I'm no longer close to anyone. I feel left out. I feel completely alone. I feel isolated from others. It's difficult for me to make friends. And again, a lot of these, and yes, I know I didn't read all of the questions, but a lot of these, it's really up to interpretation of what words mean. So for some people, they would think of every acquaintance that they know. So that person that you maybe see once every 2 or 3 weeks when you go to that bar or that meetup or whatever, is that a friend or is that an acquaintance? I would define that person as an acquaintance. So to answer the question, it's difficult for me to make friends. Well, I can make acquaintances fairly easy. But friend, I think there's a different level of emotional connection with someone that is a friend than is an acquaintance. So again, these questions here, and yes, I realize they're statements that you're answering often, sometimes, rarely, or never agree with. It's largely up to interpretation. And that's not to take anything away, because feeling of loneliness is also up to interpretation. Nobody can tell you that you are not lonely if you feel lonely. Continuing on, they say the scores on the UCLA scale range from 20 to 80. People scoring 43 and above were considered to be lonely, with a higher score suggesting a greater level of loneliness and social isolation. Now let's talk about the breakdowns of who is the loneliest. And yes, I realize it's not a competition, but we'll talk about it. Stay tuned. This is Peace, Love, Liberty Radio.
In 1999, Darryl W. Perry began a search for traditional values, which led him down a path to the ideas of liberty. He tells the story in A Rebel's Journey, My Path to Liberty. Of the book, Dr. Brian Sovereign says, sometimes it's funny, and sometimes I think it's crazy, but it's always authentic. Find A Rebel's Journey, My Path to Liberty by Darryl W. Perry on Facebook, read reviews on Amazon, ask for A Rebel's Journey wherever books are sold, or visit arebelsjourney.com.
It is the year 91,001 BCE. Witness humanity's origins in Hyperchronius, a classic role-playing game for Windows PCs, with a story like no other game before. A liberty-oriented experience that is not to be missed. Go to ZOG.Ninja to get your copy of Hyperchronius today. Use the code FPP to get $1 off. Hyperchronius, ZOG.Ninja, code FPP.
Hey, this is Scott from the ANCAP Barbershop, and you're listening to Peace, Love, Liberty Radio with Darryl W. Perry.
Welcome back to Peace, Love, and Liberty Radio. Now, something that can kind of be a competition, and that would be which cryptocurrency is the best. And yes, I realize that's kind of a loaded question and also up for interpretation. But one of the ones that I think is definitely among the best, if not the best, it's definitely in the conversation, that is Zencash. Why do I think that Zencash deserves to be in the conversation for best cryptocurrency? Well, Zencash, unlike most other cryptocurrencies, has end-to-end encryption built into their coin. And they use zero-knowledge technologies. And it's not just the cryptocurrency. They also have a platform that allows for sharing of communications and data in addition to value. And again, it can be done securely, both transmitted and stored securely. And with nearly 12,000 secure nodes, more than the number of regular nodes that the Bitcoin network has, Zencash has one of the most distributed secure node systems of any cryptocurrency. Zencash is a platform for cryptocurrency and communications built by voluntarists for voluntarists, with the ideas of voluntary interaction being written into the white paper no less than half a dozen times. And the Zencash wallet is available for Linux, Mac, Windows, and Android devices. And it's not just available in English. It's available in multiple languages. Learn more at zencash.com. That's zencash.com. Now, jumping back into the article here from NPR, talking about the loneliness of Americans. Again, 20,000 adults were given the UCLA Loneliness Scale. And yes, I will post the link in the show notes where you can take this quiz, or whatever term you want to use for it, test, quiz, survey, etc., and figure out where you fall on the loneliness scale. You can do that at your leisure. Again, scores range from 20 to 80. People with a score 43 or higher were considered to be lonely, according to the Cigna survey, with a higher score suggesting a greater level of loneliness and social isolation. More than half of the respondents, 54%, said they always or sometimes feel that no one knows them well. 56% reported they sometimes or always felt like the people around them are not necessarily with them. And 2 in 5 felt like they lack companionship, that their relationships aren't meaningful, and that they are isolated from others. The survey also found that the average loneliness score in America is 44, which suggests that most Americans would be considered lonely, according to the report. David Cordani, president and CEO of Cigna, said half of Americans view themselves as lonely. I can't help but be surprised by that. And then they say Cigna is an underwriter of NPR and provides health insurance for NPR employees. And again, this is published on NPR, so they're doing sort of a full disclosure sort of thing there. But the results, they say, are consistent with other previous research. Julianne Holt-Lundstad, a psychologist at Brigham Young University who studies loneliness and its health effects, says while she wasn't involved with the Cigna survey, it's difficult to compare the loneliness scores in different studies. She says other nationally representative estimates have found that between 20 and 43% of Americans report feeling lonely or socially isolated. Now, I would say that these are not necessarily contradictory statements. I realize on the surface, Cigna saying half of Americans are lonely, and this psychologist from BYU saying that between 20 and 43% of Americans report feeling lonely or socially isolated. Again, not contradictory, because one can be lonely but not report in a survey of, yes, I feel lonely. Because some people don't want to admit it, right? That there's some kind of social stigma attached with, I feel lonely or I feel depressed. Oh, you don't think there is social stigma around that? Almost any time somebody says, I'm feeling a little depressed, there's always going to be at least one person, if not many more, that say, well, just cheer up. There's always stigma around loneliness and depression, and the two were heavily linked. Continuing on, Cordani, again, that's the CEO of Cigna, he says loneliness has health consequences. There's a blurred line between mental and physical health. Oftentimes, medical symptoms present themselves and they're correlated with mental, lifestyle, behavioral issues, or loneliness. Or rather, behavioral issues like loneliness. Several studies in recent years, including one by Holt Lundstad, have documented the public health effects of loneliness. It's also been linked with a higher risk of coronary heart disease and stroke, and has been shown to influence our genes and immune system and even recovery from breast cancer. And there's growing evidence that loneliness can kill. Holt Lundstad said, "We have robust evidence that it increases risk for premature mortality. Studies have found that loneliness can be a predictor of premature death, not just for the elderly, but even more so for younger individuals. The latest survey also found something surprising about loneliness in the younger generation. Dr. Douglas Nimicek, the Chief Medical Officer for Behavioral Health at Cigna, says our survey found that actually the younger generation was lonelier than the older generation. Members of Generation Z, those born between the mid-1990s and the early 2000s, had an overall loneliness score of 48.3. Millennials, just a little bit older, scored 45.3. By comparison, baby boomers scored a 42. The supposed greatest generation, those over the age of 72, had a loneliness score of 38. Now, I think a lot of that has to do with the way people were raised, right? So when I was younger, we actually interacted with neighbors. That doesn't really happen anymore. And also, I suspect the older generation tends to wind up living together more in like retirement communities, right? So, yeah, it makes sense that they're not as lonely. Stay tuned.
This November, I'll be running the world's biggest and most popular marathon, the New York City Marathon, as a member of Team Innocence Project. The Innocence Project was the first legal organization to systematically apply DNA testing to cases of wrongful convictions as a powerful tool to reveal innocence. Tony Wright is a perfect example of the power of DNA. The Innocence Project litigated for almost 6 years to get the court's permission for DNA testing. Tony had been incarcerated for nearly 25 years in Pennsylvania and narrowly escaped the death penalty. Tony's case, sadly, is not unique. Empowered with the unequivocal proof of innocence provided by DNA technology, the Innocence Project has litigated hundreds of wrongful conviction cases, leading to the exoneration and freedom for more than 180 people through DNA testing. Overall, there have been 356 DNA exonerees in the United States who were wrongfully imprisoned for more than 4,875 years in total. You can help support the Innocence Project and help me secure my race entry in the New York City Marathon by going to run.freetalklive.com.
You're listening to Peace, Love, Liberty Radio, online at fppradio.com.
Hey, welcome back to Peace, Love, Liberty Radio, online at fppradio.com. You know what? I want to actually go ahead and jump from this article, and there's a good bit more here. I want to jump from this article about loneliness to the other one about why people tend to make bad decisions and self-compassion. I know self-compassion is something that has been talked about a good bit on this show, and I'll jump into that article here in just a moment. But first, I've got a question for you. Yeah, I know. I answer yours every Friday, and you can send those in using the anonymous contact form, ama.fppradio.com. But right now, I've got a question for you. Do you use free market money? Are you a supporter of Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies as an alternative to the fiat monies that governments wind up forcing upon us? If so, then you need SpendABit in your arsenal. SpendABit is the search engine for things you can buy with Bitcoin. SpendABit aggregates millions of products from thousands of Bitcoin-enabled merchants. Keep your money in the free economy. Spend a bit. Use my affiliate link, spendabit.fppradio.com. And if you're a Bitcoin-accepting merchant like I am, ask about their merchant suite to reach even more customers. spendabit.fppradio.com. So, jumping into this other article, and like I say, I see these as very connected. One talking about loneliness, the other talking about self-compassion. And again, in a lot of ways, I think these are very connected. Let me just jump into the article. And yes, I realize it's an older article, about 3.5 years old. It came out September 2014. But like I said, I just came across it earlier today and didn't realize it was old until I saw the date up at the top. But the article begins, again, from Time Health. Self-love isn't just for hippies and millennials. If you're trying to stick to a diet or scrape together the motivation to go to the gym, it might be for you as well. So finds a new meta-analysis published in the journal Health Psychology. Self-compassion, defined as accepting yourself without judgment when times get tough, is linked to better health behaviors. People often think they are motivated by self-criticism, but a burgeoning area of research suggests just the opposite. Being kind to yourself, as opposed to tearing yourself down, leads to fewer bad feelings and, in turn, healthier actions. One study found that when people were assigned the practice of self-compassion, they were able to curb their smoking habits faster. The reason self-compassion works, according to some researchers, is that it might be the ability to improve self-regulation, the follow-through that you need to stay loyal to healthy behaviors. This analysis looked at 15 studies of more than 3,000 total people across the age spectrum and discovered a link between self-compassion and 4 key health-promoting behaviors: eating better, exercising more, getting more restful sleep, and stressing less. People who were more self-compassionate practiced these health habits more often. Study author Fuchsia Sirois, I guess I'm pronouncing that right, I'm not really sure, professor of psychology at Bishop's University in Quebec, says so much research right now is suggesting that not engaging in these behaviors can be the precursor to a variety of different life-threatening and chronic diseases, such as diabetes, hypertension, cardiovascular disease, arthritis, you name it. Developing self-compassion is a way to commit to the behaviors you already know you should do. In addition to just being nice to yourself, self-compassion requires you to embrace that you're part of the human race that shares common miseries and mindfully recognizes negative feelings without getting enmeshed in them. If that sounds impossible, well, Sirois assures you that it's not. The psychology professor adds, one of the reasons we're quite excited by the finding is that self-compassion is a quality that can be cultivated. Writing a letter to yourself as if you were your own friend and opening it up in times of stress or failure is one way to start. She suggests Kristen Neff, a pioneer in this field of research, and offers a guide to self-compassion meditations and other exercises on her website. And then it links over to a website, again, with several exercises. I'll go over those very briefly. But again, reminder that the link will be in the show notes. You can follow it at your leisure. There is also a test. Yes, I know, another test. And again, you don't have to take these if you don't want to. But the test I found very interesting to figure out how self-compassionate you actually are. And again, much like the test to determine loneliness, there's a lot of things that are up for interpretation here. And this one has 26 questions. And you answer each statement by either saying almost never, occasionally, about half the time, fairly often, or almost always. And this one is actually online, so you don't need to do the math yourself. So after you answer all of the questions, you click a little thing that says calculate scores, and then it gives you a breakdown of a self-kindness score, a self-judgment score, a common humanity score, isolation, mindfulness, over-identification, and then an overall score, and then it tells you how to interpret those scores. And again, links over to some self-compassion exercises that we will go over very briefly in the closing moments here on Peace, Love, Liberty Radio, online at fppradio.com.
Are you tired of governments murdering people around the world? Stop using their money. There is an alternative. Bitcoin is a stateless, free market, non-political currency. Bitcoin cannot be inflated or controlled by any government. By using their money, you are helping the state. Stop doing it. You have an incredible alternative available now. Learn it, use it, spread it. Get started with Bitcoin at weusecoins.com. That's weusecoins.com. Why do they hate us? Is libertarianism compatible with Islam? Davi Barker answers these questions and more in Voluntary Islam and Other Essays. He advances the voluntarist cause with analysis of the confluence of values between Islam and libertarianism, as well as contemporary movements from the Tea Party to the Arab Spring. Voluntary Islam by Davi Barker is available from Amazon.com and all major bookstores.
You're listening to Peace, Love, Liberty Radio with Darryl W. Perry. Online at fppradio.com.
Welcome back to Peace, Love, Liberty Radio. Online at fppradio.com. I am your host, Darryl W. Perry. And, before I go over some of these self-compassion exercises of how you can increase your self-compassion, I just want to say that if I seem a little distracted, it's because I upgraded my version of Ubuntu earlier today, and, well, in doing so, it also upgraded the version of the recording software. And while it's about 90% the same, it's acting slightly different than normal. So just taking a little bit of getting used to figuring out the new version of Audacity to where there were a couple of spots where you don't know it, but I actually paused. You might be able to figure it out if you go back and re-listen. But then, oh, wait, this created a new track. I didn't want to create a new track. I wanted to just go from where I was and then not have to import one track into another track. So, yeah, little distracted. But like I said, I've been having one of those days for a couple of days. So the self-compassion thing, yeah, something I'm working on. The feelings of loneliness, yeah, something I've got to work on. So some of these exercises I might wind up doing later today. So the first exercise, and again, they give a breakdown of each of these exercises. The first 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 of them, about between 15 to 24 minutes each, with the final one estimated here at 5 minutes. So the first is, how would you treat a friend? How do you think things might change if you responded to yourself in the same way that you typically respond to a close friend when he or she is suffering? This exercise walks you through that. Exercise number 2, this is exercise, they say, can be used any time of day or night and will help you remember to evoke the 3 aspects of self-compassion in the moment you need it most. And that is available as an MP3. Again, all of these you would click on to actually go to the exercise. Exercise number 3 is exploring self-compassion through writing. Number 4 is the criticizer, the criticized, and the compassionate observer. In this, you sit in different chairs to help get in touch with different, often conflicting parts of yourself. Number 5, change the critical self-talk. Number 6 is a self-compassion journal. Identify what you really want, and then take care of the caregiver. Don't forget, I answer your questions every Friday. Send those in, ama.fppradio.com.
The podcasts of FPP Radio are licensed under Copy Heart. We believe that copying is a form of flattery and do not abide by the copyright laws. Those laws serve to restrict the flow of ideas which no one can really own. Copying is an act of love. Love is not subject to law. If you enjoy the show, consider joining the Fans program and get perks like ad-free versions of Peace, Love, Liberty Radio and FPP Radio News, and also get a copy of the monthly newspaper FPP News. To learn more or to join the Fans program, visit fans.fppradio.com.